But then I focused in on a plant category called ubulao, which are plants to cleanse the body and to open the mind. The ubulao gives you who you are. So when you use it, it'll help you to reveal more about yourself. You isolate yourself, because when I did my Dieta with my teacher, I isolated myself in a house in Jeppestown, and just took the plant medicines and had very, very deep insights about and revelations into my own self.
Ancient African plants. This is research that actually hasn't been covered in detail. And luckily for us, we've got with us someone who has spent many, many years researching African psychoactive plants. Jean-Francois, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Deepak. Thank you.
So, Jean, tell us about this book that you wrote, The Phytoactive African Plants?
Yes, Psychoactive African Plants, Journeys in Phytoalchemy. The journey started throughout my life, I was interested in plants and wanting to be a herbalist when I was young. But then basically after school, I wanted to become a herbalist, but there was no training in South Africa to do that academically. So I went into and did a BSc, a Bachelor of Science in Botany and Zoology at Wits University. And basically, Deepak, while I was doing those studies, I wasn't really interested in the taxonomy or what I was actually studying, but I was interested very much in plants that could. I saw this book actually in the local library on mushrooms. That was in a set of encyclopedias of various drugs like PCP, and I was thinking, what is mushrooms doing in this category of drug use? When I read this book, I was fascinated by the fly agaric mushroom, the toadstool mushroom, which is used in Asia for shamanic flight and for. They described how the Koryak tribes in Siberia would use this as a shamanic inebriant to basically have soul flight and to do shamanic healing. And I was blown away that a mushroom could actually do this. And so that opened me up to the world of psychedelics and psychedelic medicine. I researched everything there was to know about the fly agaric mushroom, its chemistry, how it's been used around the world for this shamanic healing. But then that basically opened me up to other plants like San Pedro cactus, ayahuasca, psilocybin magic mushrooms. So I became fascinated by how substances could reveal so much about our consciousness and how it can be used as a tool to work with consciousness. But then along the way, I was curious whether the Sangomas, the traditional healers of Southern Africa, were using, like in the Amazon, ayahuasca, were using plants here. And I posed the question, are traditional healers and the Sangomas and the Nyangas using visionary plants to aid their trance states? Because I knew that Sangomas were going into trance. And so I was very curious whether Sangomas were familiar with such plants. And that set me off on a journey, and I had a passion and a drive to answer that question. So I did my own field work. I went off with my little VW Beetle into the locations and started talking to people. I started asking them, are you using plants for imibono? So imibono in Zulu means visions, having a vision. And very soon after doing that research, I started getting reports of plants being used, some of them very toxic plants like Buffon disticha or Ngoto in Zulu. It's called the ispili or the mirror. So they call it the bioscope, the television, or the ispili. And you use a particular amount of this plant to see visions of lost objects or who stole your car, or various things. And it's a very strong visionary plant, but very toxic, like I say. So I wouldn't recommend people to experiment with it. You need a traditional healer who knows exactly how to cook the medicine and provide the medicine. So I picked up more and more that there was these plants being used. And at the same time, in 1999, I met a professor at University of Johannesburg, who basically encouraged me to do an inventory of all the plants used for psychoactive purposes, Deepak. So what I did was I sifted through all the ethnographies, all the old literature from 1937 in the William Cullen Library, these dust-covered books. I opened them up and I read through all these anthropological, ethnographical texts for looking for mentions of psychoactive plants. And I found amazing reports of medicines. For example, in the Gorbo ritual, they put the initiate puts his head into a calabash of water and plant medicines, and opens his eyes, and the medicines would go through into the bloodstream through the eyes, and then he would cross the rivers of consciousness, as it was described. And I was amazed by the diversity of visionary psychoactive plants being used. And this was like, I picked up so many instances that eventually I recorded 306 species of plants being used from sedatives to stimulants to memory enhancers, visionary plants, sleep-inducing plants, etc. And so that was a remarkable finding, because the classical textbooks on visionary plants, or texts like Plants of the Gods by Richard Evans Schultes and Hoffman, said Africa was poor in psychoactive visionary plants. And they gave cultural reasons around hunter-gatherer societies being reliant on visionary plants, but agricultural societies having lost that reverence. What I found, it actually showed that agricultural pastoralist societies do venerate and do use lots of visionary plants and psychoactive plants as part of their customs. So this filled in the gap in Africa, of the African psychoactive plants, and I even call Southern Africa the cradle of psychoactive plant use, because there's so many plants that need to be investigated here.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jean. That was absolutely brilliant, and it's so relevant because a few episodes ago we actually had a Nyanga on our show, and he was talking about the difference between Nyanga and Sangomas and the plants that they use, and he was also mentioning that Sangomas use a lot of like visionary energy frequency plants to put people into a different trance-like state, and you've actually gone and done the research from it, so it's so cool to see the scientific well documented research that you've done. And then we've also spoken to an actual Sangoma Nyanga a few days ago, or a few episodes ago. So Jean, maybe tell us about the gap in this research, because clearly you have done some innovative, cutting-edge research into African psychoactive plants. And why do you think there was such a big gap? I mean, why was all the funding put into plants in other regions and not Africa?
Absolutely. So Deepak, what I found after doing this research, or during doing this research, is that it became quite clear that because of the apartheid era, the research was very much the interest of white researchers, Anglo-Saxon researchers basically, who were interested in food plants, but there was only 7% of research done on magical, traditionally used plants. So there was a research bias in the research field to study plants that were, that had nothing to do with the local indigenous cultures. So there was basically, that's the main reason. And there was also a little bit of a stigma around substance use. So there weren't many researchers who were interested in substance use, apart from there was one prolific researcher called Watt. And in 1967, he wrote a paper about, it was like a review paper on some of the possible psychoactive plants used in Southern Africa. But that was probably one of the only papers on the subject until 20 years ago, when there was a revitalization, and when I met this professor, Ben Erik van Wyk at UJ. He was looking at the same time in some of his books There was a chapter in one of his books on mind and mood plants. And so there was this interesting synchronicity of the research, meeting him and doing my research at that time, which was like on the cusp of the revitalization of studying these plants. And that led me to do the field work, do the inventory, and then I published different papers on psychoactive plant use. I did the inventory as a broad picture, perspective, but then I focused in on a plant category called ubulao, which are plants to cleanse the body and to open the mind. I did more narrow investigations of plants used in divination, which I showed 45% of plants used for divination have other psychoactive plant uses in the from the inventory. So there was this very clear link that in Southern Africa, psychoactive plants were mostly used. The biggest category of psychoactive plants is actually for mental disorders. So even beyond the religious use, there was a lot of experimentation and use in Southern Africa for plants used for epilepsy, dementia, Alzheimer's disease, convulsive conditions like epilepsy, etc., which shows that there's an incredible psychoactive pharmacopoeia that's being used in Southern Africa, which is hardly researched. So 20 years is not a long time in research because it's very, very, very recent, and most of the plants in the inventory that are in my book haven't been researched from a cultural point of view or from a scientific point of view. So there's incredible amounts of research still to be done on our flora here in Southern Africa.
Wow, thank you, Jean. So this is maybe a good segue to actually talk about maybe some of the applications of these plants, because you mentioned that you found the use in divination, epilepsy, dementia. Maybe give us some of the broad applications that you found that these psychoactive plants were really useful in.
Absolutely, Deepak. Well, there's what I learned during my journey is that there's a sliding scale of psychoactivity from strong psychoactive plants to subtle acting psychoactive plants. And, things like, I'm just trying to think of common psychoactive plants like Artemisia afra, like wormwood, helps to calm a very angry person down, so the bitter plants are quite cooling on the system, and they can actually act as mild tonics for relaxation. The same goes for Olea europa, the wild olive. The wild olive is also one of those plants that can relax. So in my book, I dedicate a chapter to the plants that are useful for either focusing concentration, increasing memory, having relaxing effects, etc. So there's so many of them. It's hard to know where to start, but there are numerous plants.
But you mentioned some broad categories. I think you mentioned like some plants would be used for depression and mood upliftment, and then there would be maybe other plants that are used for more intense psychoactive treatments.
Yes.
You can maybe explain that a bit
Absolutely.
more. That sounds very interesting.
Absolutely, Deepak. So what is very, very what was very interesting for me is that I did a plant medicine initiation in 2012, where I went through a sequence of plant medicines, and when I read this other paper by a multidisciplinary team researching the South American plants used by the curanderos, I noticed the same categories of plants were being used, and I was gobsmacked. I was like, wow, this is exactly what I went through. And so what happens is that in the initiation of Sangomas and shamans alike, there are four main categories that the person goes through. The four main categories of medicines. The first one is cleansing medicine. So you steam with certain medicines and bath with them just to cleanse the system, cleanse your past, cut cords from the past, etc. and it prepares you for the opening. So the second category is opening plants, the ubulao plants, which opens up your dreaming and opens up your intuition. And that's where you dig very deep. The ubulao plants are like a mirror. They help you to see like the deepest questions. They help me to see my deepest questions of my life and where I was going, and that I'm still looking at today. But that said, with all the opening, it can be sometimes very overwhelming or intense. And so my teacher suggested I use a relaxing medicine, a red medicine made from tree barks. And so I used that medicine, and for about a week I grounded. And she taught me that it's very important not just to open with medicine, the strong medicines, but to also relax and to ground. And it makes a lot of sense. I've put forward that, it shows that it's that perturbation, change in the system is good, but you can't have perturbation all the time. You need periods of time of rest, of grounding and centering to absorb that information and utilize it properly. So the main categories would be cleansing, opening, relaxing, and then strengthening medicines. And so there's these 4 categories of plant medicines that are used in a sequence to take a person through a process of transformation. And that shows that traditional medicine is very sophisticated. It's not as it's often portrayed. Traditional medicine is often portrayed as being simple, unsophisticated, magic or black magic or whatever. But it actually shows that there is a pragmatic technology of using psychoactive plants for self-development and for healing. And it's not only one plant. There's a lot of focus on the cannabis culture, for example. And cannabis, I was just talking this morning to someone about this, is that cannabis has opened up many people to the plant world. But there are so many plants used for self-development and healing that it's there's a whole kingdom of plants. But you have to know how to use the plants correctly too. If you use too much of one of the categories of medicine, it can be very detrimental to the gastrointestinal system, for example. The red medicines, too much red medicine is not good.
Yeah, that's great. And Jean-Francois, you're going to be coming to the upcoming Wellness Hub on the 5th of November.
Yes.
You're also going to be sharing some insight into your book. You're actually giving a talk. Are you going to be sharing this type of knowledge? What can the visitors come and expect
Absolutely.
from your talk?
I'm open to discussions on all levels of plants. So I will be showcasing my plant there, and for people doing book signings. But basically, anyone who's got questions about the use of plants for self-development and growth, I'll be happy to engage.
So there was something else you mentioned to me that was so fascinating. You mentioned something about the shamanic dieta and how that's been practiced in other parts of the world. I know that they do that in South America, a shamanic dieta. Maybe you can explain to our listeners what is a shamanic dieta, and then what you found similar in the African culture.
Absolutely, Deepak. So what I found is that not only is plant teacher medicine, it's usually ascribed to the South American plants, but what I learned through my training and through my teacher is that the ubulao gives you who you are. So when you use it, it will help you to reveal more about yourself. So in essence, ubulao is an African plant teacher medicine. So the concept of plant teacher medicine can be applied to Africa and South America, and possibly other, most likely other regions of the planet. So the plants are teachers, and they help you to see more of yourself. And as I said, they're not only used; they're used in the same way, in the same fashion as the South American medicine. The Southern African psychoactive plant medicine is used in the same way. And the Dieta is in the same concept is used in South Africa. You isolate yourself, because when I did my Dieta with my teacher, I isolated myself in a house in Jeppestown, and just took the plant medicines and had a very, very deep insights about and revelations into my own self and my journey. And I wasn't allowed to have certain foods. So Dieta, is pretty much defined like a period of intense engagement with one plant, where the plant will reveal to you more about yourself and your connection to the universe, and will help you to know more about yourself. And that's exactly what I did with my teacher. So the concept of dietas is the same in Southern Africa as in South America. So it shows that plant technology has evolved around the planet and found the same kind of, healers have found the same application of using the plants in different areas around the world, which is amazing. It shows that it's a very sophisticated technology using plant medicine.
We're so grateful that you spent all these hours researching it. I had no idea that it was 2 decades, over 20 years ago that you started with this, and we're so lucky that the African culture has kept this knowledge. They've passed it down from Sangoma to Sangoma, probably kept it in the family line, and maybe thousands of years of knowledge you've been able to tap into because you had that curiosity and the drive and determination and actually put in the effort to go and speak to all of them. And the Sangomas I've met, they've been using plants for a long time, and they learn it from the senior Sangoma. And yeah, I guess they've also understood what you're sharing with us, but you've now brought sort of a Western research approach to it, and you've put this book in you've put this book together in an easy to understand format. So yeah, we're very, very grateful for that. Guys, below I will leave the details to Jean-Francois' website. There'll also be a link to his book. You definitely need to check out this book. Anyone interested in traditional healing, African plants, African psychoactive plants. I know there's a lot of Sangomas out there in South Africa that would definitely benefit from this, because what Jean-Francois has actually done is he's brought the Western names to it and the clinical research from a Western point of view, and connected it, I guess, with the historic cultural knowledge. Because just as an example, the Sangoma that we had in the previous episode, he knew all the Nyanga names or the Gedla names for his plants, like the local South African names, but he didn't know what they were. He wouldn't know how to describe it to me in English. So he struggled when he's in Johannesburg to go and find these plants, because not everyone knows it as the name that he refers to it as, because he comes from Venda or somewhere. So this has so many benefits, I think, for the whole country and for the whole traditional healing community. Jean-Francois, we've come to the end of our show, but we really look forward to interacting with you on the Wellness Hub event. We want to learn more. Maybe you can show us some plants that you have. I'm sure there will be a lot of listeners very interested in this topic. Guys, thank you very much. Jean-Francois, do you have any closing remarks?
No, just look forward to the Wellness Hub and to sharing with people and getting the book out there. Yeah, thank you, Deepak, and thanks for the opportunity to be able to bridge the different traditions.